Direct from CBS News Convention Headquarters in Chicago, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Charles Kuralt in the CBS Newsroom in New York. Eric Severide in Chicago, John Lawrence in Chicago, Richard Threlkeld in Pasadena, California, Richard O'Brien in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Terry Drinkwater in Lake Tahoe, California, Bill Plant in Chicago, and Mike Wallace in Chicago.
Good evening from the CBS News Convention anchor booth in Chicago's International Amphitheater, the site of the Democratic National Convention. This is the main entrance to the convention complex, a collection of buildings stretching about a quarter of a mile and some 500 feet deep, located approximately 5 miles from downtown Chicago. The main entrance has been made to look somewhat like the entrance to the White House, although here in the middle of Chicago's Stockyard District, it does appear just a little out of place. Police and federal agents are everywhere. A chain-link fence topped by barbed wire surrounds the amphitheater area. Traffic is restricted, must go through checkpoints and special gates. It's said the system can keep out anything except the stockyard's odor. Perhaps in keeping with stockyard practice, everyone's herded through an inner sanctum system when entering the building. The delegates come in here, and beyond the red, white, and blue entranceway lie the first of the magnetic card scanners and security searches. There are 24 different card categories, and the cards are color-coded with a different color for each day of the convention. When the right day's card, worn about the neck on an elastic string, is inserted in the proper machine, a green light lights. Using the wrong card, or a fake one, or the wrong entry or exit even, will set off a red light and a loud buzzer. Security officials also search briefcases, boxes, pocketbooks, bags of those coming into the hall, even newspapers if they're rolled up. The hall itself is surrounded by a high wall broken only by entry and exit ways, which in turn have a second set of card scanners and more guards and agents. In all, aside from the machines, there are more than 26,000 men and women, federal, state, and local, assigned to protect 5,000 Democrats here on the way to and from the hotels, in the city, and around it. All this for a quadrennial meeting of the nation's oldest and its largest political party. The party's main job, of course, is choosing a presidential candidate. And the name frequently heard recently has not been that of Humphrey or McCarthy or McGovern or even of Johnson. It's been Massachusetts Senator Edwin Kennedy. But today, the boomlet appeared to have been nipped in the bud for Edward Kennedy when the senator, through a spokesman, said he does not want his name placed in nomination. The spokesman said Kennedy had talked to former Ohio Governor Michael DeSalle, who had intended to put forward the nomination, and that DeSalle has now agreed not to do so. But as Mike Wallace reports, Kennedy's supporters may not give up quite that easily.
Walter, in spite of the call from Senator Kennedy's press secretary to former Governor DeSalle, CBS News has learned the draft Kennedy movement remains very much alive. It's understood that Senator Kennedy's supporters were concerned that Mike DeSalle had become too much the focal point of the draft movement, and that if there were to be a real push, it would have to be directed from other, more powerful quarters. Jesse Unruh, leader of the huge California delegation, has been meeting with influential delegates all day today. A corps of former Robert Kennedy workers are now hard at work. Delegates are being contacted at this moment. There are indications of support for the Kennedy draft in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Missouri, as well as New York, California, and his home state of Massachusetts, of course. The line the Kennedy supporters are taking is that the draft movement has moved too far and has too much momentum to be stopped now. Mike Wallace, CBS News, Chicago.
Vice President Humphrey spent his Chicago day visiting delegations, looking for supporters, acting like he's running behind, not ahead, and explaining his position to anybody who would listen. Late this afternoon, he sat down at Convention Hotel headquarters for an interview with Eric Severide.
Mr. Humphrey, what harms a political party the most with the voters? A dull convention like the one in Miami, or a boisterous one as this promises to be?
I tell you, we'll have to wait and see. But it surely is the extremes. Miami had its very dull moments, and this one has its wild and erratic moments. I've appealed to my fellow Democrats to give some semblance of sanity and of stability to the American people here, but I guess the American people do expect Democrats to, well, they must expect it because it's happened at practically every convention that I can recall, of sort of getting out of hand for a while, and then we do seem to settle down and settle in. I hope that'll be the case. I guess if you have your druthers, you'd rather have some action. At least I know you fellows would. It gives you a better show.
Mr. Vice President, you think you can come out of this action with a unified Democratic Party that won't damage your chances for election if you get the nomination?
Well, I think when we come out at first, we'll look a little battered and torn and scarred. I think that's a fact, but we heal quickly. I want you to know that our healing level rate is very, very good, and we come back together, particularly if we can get a little attack from the opposition, and we can depend on that. Mr. Nixon will not fail us, I'm sure of that.
CBS News correspondent Martin Negronsky and Eric Severide interviewing Vice President Humphrey. Democratic platform writers struggled today with that Vietnam plank that's been giving them so much trouble and came up with a draft proposal backed by Vice President Humphrey and supporting the administration. Daniel Shore reports.
The first round of the great Democratic debate over Vietnam is over, and it has not been much of a fight. Here in the Democratic Drafting Committee for the platform, it lasted about 5 or 10 minutes. The lines had already been rigidly drawn. There was the majority resolution on the whole supporting the administration's position in Vietnam, although offering on certain qualified conditions a bombing halt in Vietnam, that is to say, if conditions are met, about protection of our troops there and international supervision. That concession, endorsed by Vice President Humphrey, was not enough to lure the Doves to change their position. They stood solidly behind the McCarthy-McGovern resolution, unconditional bombing halt, de-escalation of the war, and action towards a coalition government. And that was all. It was all over within a few minutes. There was, by voice vote, a majority vote for the administration's position, which is now the Humphrey campaign position, and then there was the announcement that there would be a minority report. It goes now from the 22-member drafting committee to the full 110-member committee on the platform. It is not likely there that the issue will be much different. And from there to the convention floor, and there the real fight. Daniel Shore, CBS News at the Democratic Platform Committee.
The Credentials Committee proposed a compromise today in the dispute over seating the Georgia delegation. The committee recommends seating all members of both the so-called regular and loyalist factions and dividing the state's 43 convention votes between them. It's sure to spark a fight, and in order to get right to it and to other seating disputes, Credentials proposals are going to be taken up tonight rather than tomorrow night as originally scheduled.
You get many different descriptions of a common complaint.
It's a stuffy, uncomfortable feeling for me.
It's a tense, tight burning sensation.
An upset stomach.
I suppose it's a very precise description. All I know is that,
it's a rotten, miserable feeling.
Recognize your description of heartburn and acid indigestion. People are affected differently, but one product relieves all those symptoms. Digel, the extra action antacid, with the extra action of simethicone. This white layer of Digel contains effective antacids to neutralize excess acid. This yellow layer contains simethicone in a patented formulation that breaks up frothy bubbles of gas to help relax your tense, tight stomach. So whatever you call indigestion distress, remember Digel with simethicone is the extra action antacid that brings you more complete relief, tablets or liquid.
Much of the security we spoke of earlier is to head off any possible demonstrations by the many protest groups that are here. We have a report from CBS News correspondent Jack Lawrence.
The protesters are on the march again today after a series of bloody clashes with police last night and early this morning, in which at least 20 persons were injured, a dozen arrested.
Carrying a Viet Cong flag, more than 500 marched on police headquarters this afternoon to protest the arrest of New Left leader Tom Hayden, an organizer of this Chicago campaign. Hayden was charged with disorderly conduct for his activities in last night's confrontation. Police moved in to enforce the 11 o'clock curfew in Lincoln Park, where the demonstrators want to sleep. Police finally cleared the park and in the process struck several news reporters. Today, charges of police brutality were raised as injured yippies showed their wounds and their anger.
Now I think that we have to stop what's happening here. We were shouting at the cops yesterday that they should go to Prague and teach the Russians some stuff, and apparently they took that as a compliment. We don't trust the Democratic Party. We don't trust the Republican Party. We don't trust the American government. So we're officially asking for a UN observer to come to Chicago.
U.S. Attorney Thomas Foran witnessed some of the incidents near Lincoln Park last night. Would you say the police were brutal or restrained?
I would say generally the police were very well disciplined and very restrained, without question. There was one incident that I thought was not justified. It involved only about 4 out of 1,000 policemen. And that matter is being investigated not only by our office, but by the Chicago police. Otherwise, their discipline was excellent. There was no club swinging, there was no tear gas, there was no mace, there was no excessive pushing, no vilification from the police at all. The crowd was taunting them, obviously trying to test them. I was very impressed.
After last night's violence and today's arrest of Tom Hayden, the mood of the marchers was more militant. Less obvious is the fear of many of the demonstrators that a few revolutionaries among them might provoke a more serious conflict. John Lawrence, CBS News, Chicago.
Scotland Yard was stymied, filled with bafflement. A gang of crooks had hijacked a whole truckload of Kent. They searched the country over, couldn't find a clue. So they called Detective Stone. He'd know what to do. Stone went to a thieves' den and slyly prowled about. Then he stopped and smiled and pointed 2 men out. His sidekick said, "Stone, how can you be sure they stole the Kent?" "Elementary, my dear sidekick. They're the ones who look content."
He solved the case.
The taste of Kent.
He solved the case.
Ah, the taste of Kent.
He solved the case.
Yes, the taste of Kent.
More taste, fine tobacco.
The moral is you simply can't disguise the enjoyment you get from Kent. King size or 100s. Both have the best taste in filter smoking today. To a smoker, it's the taste of Kent in any length.
Soviet soldiers are still in Prague tonight. Czechoslovakia's leaders apparently are still in Moscow, but there are signs that everybody may be going home. No one in the West knows for sure what's happening in Moscow, but the reports indicate a compromise. The reformed Czechoslovak government, which the Russians called traitorous, would stay in power, but the press, the radio, and the television would be controlled, restricted especially from saying anything unkind about the Russians. As for the Soviet troops, they would be withdrawn, perhaps over a period of months. CBS News correspondent Morley Safer tells us from Prague that one eyewitness says Soviet tanks are already leaving the city. Reports of the peace formula came from presumably informed sources in Moscow. This solution that may have been reached is one that would permit both sides to claim a victory, but there's no way of knowing popular reaction in Czechoslovakia to such a curtailment of newly granted liberties. Promptly at 9 this morning their time, before the reports of settlement, the people of Prague staged a short general strike in their main square to protest the Soviet occupation. For 15 minutes, they rang church bells, they honked horns and set off sirens, and not a car moved. 3 Soviet soldiers entered the grounds of the U.S. Embassy in Prague today, picked up some apples, and started eating them. An embassy officer told them, "You're eating American apples, put them back," and he asked them to leave. The soldiers said, "We have our orders." The U.S. officer said, "I don't care, the ambassador wants you to leave." They put down the apples and left. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said today that major crime in the United States increased by 16% last year, and that 8% fewer crimes were solved. Violent crimes accounted for most of the increase, and most of those crimes involved a gun. Of the 12,000 people who killed other people last year, 48% used pistols. And according to the FBI annual report, states with gun control laws had fewer gun deaths per capita than states without them. Massachusetts Institute of Technology versus Cal-Tech is a football score you will never see unless they play the game by computer. Such lofty institutions are not above friendly competition, however, to wit, the first intercollegiate transcontinental electric car race, which got underway today from opposite ends of the country. First to California and Richard Threlkel.
Cal-Tech's entry in the great transcontinental electric car race has the body of a 10-year-old Volkswagen. But where the gas tank used to be, 3 young students have built in enough electric wizardry to dazzle even a PhD. The car has a 20-horsepower motor and cruises at about 50 miles an hour. That is a bit slower than the MIT car, but this Cal-Tech electric does have advantages. The batteries, all 21 of them, have been tested and found reliable. The MIT batteries are experimental. Electric companies have set up free charging stations all along the way, but just in case, they're bringing a portable generator along. This car is also 1,000 pounds lighter than MIT's. The Cal-Tech students think that is their biggest advantage. High-spirited student enthusiasm and a smoggy Pasadena day. Perfect for the start of a race to test a smog-free automobile. No revving up of the engine. You can't even hear the electric motor purr. Three days and 3,000 miles later, the Cal-Tech team hopes to reach Cambridge, where the other half of the race also started today. Richard O'Brien reports.
This car from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is a 1968 Chevrolet Corvair. The conventional gasoline engine was removed and replaced with electronic controls and power supply. The power package consists of what is called a Gulton space battery, named after its forerunners, which took a number of voyages into outer space aboard U.S. space vehicles. It will give the MIT car an 80 to 100 mile range at 60 miles an hour before recharging of the batteries is necessary. Will they be passing one another en route?
Yes, we will pass each other, and we've agreed to stop and have a little powwow at that time.
Where will this take place?
We hope in Flagstaff. I don't know where they're counting on it.
Flagstaff, Arizona.
Right.
And what do you figure now, time-wise? How long will it take?
We really don't have too much of an idea. We think not less than 3.5 days and probably not more than a week.
Starting time for the race was changed twice due to mechanical difficulties. Only last week, for instance, the MIT car on a demonstration run blew a fuse and had to be pushed.
We didn't have enough torque with the resistor in, so I had to cut the resistor out, and that overloaded the circuits.
Still think you'll make it to California?
Oh, I'm quite sure. This thing will work as soon as I move this bolt down another 2 pegs.
Okay.
So it ought to work then. We'll see.
Once the difficulties were solved, the race got underway with both cars setting out at the exact same moment. And those in charge here breathed a sigh of mechanical relief as the MIT car rolled out smoothly down the street, across the Charles River, and then onto the Massachusetts Turnpike, westbound. Richard O'Brien, CBS News, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Prices on the New York Stock Exchange closed mixed today on a volume of 9,740,000 shares. The exchange index gained 8 cents.
Judge, my husband doesn't pay any attention to me anymore.
Poor lady. Well?
I have tired wife.
Tired wife?
Tired wife.
Madam, I'm going to throw the book at you.
Geritol.
The great majority of tired people don't feel that way because of iron-poor blood, and Geritol won't help them. But it's a medical fact millions of people have iron-poor blood, and you could be one of the many who are tired for that reason and need Geritol. 2 Geritol tablets give you twice the iron in a pound of calf's liver plus 7 vitamins. Geritol iron enters your bloodstream fast, carrying strength throughout your body.
No more tired wife.
Maybe my wife should take Geritol.
Take Geritol and feel stronger fast.
What's he doing in my shop with his electric razor and Williams' electric shave? So electric shave does make your whiskers stand up, lubricates your face, gives you a close, comfortable shave. A shave that feels barber close with your electric razor? Look for the big L, first letter in.
Former President Eisenhower's doctors said today that his heart is beating abnormally fast, but there has been no new instance of rapid fluttering, which can be fatal. They say his condition is still critical, but that he is comfortable. In Vietnam, Allied commanders claim today that more than 6,000 enemy soldiers have been killed in the 8 days since they broke a lull in ground fighting. However, this new fighting is not regarded as a third offensive, except in a few cases the enemy has not committed significant numbers of ground forces, and that means the communists still are quite capable of new and bigger assaults. Scattered fighting continued today, and south of the demilitarized zone, the fighting was described as intense. How to run, how to jump, that's the stuff of which Olympic training is made. But this year, the U.S. athletes have to learn something new, how to breathe. Terry Drinkwater reports.
There can be agony in winning, or even in practicing to win. The Olympic Games may be the most noble competition between nations, and for athletes, the most challenging competition. But there is pain in getting ready. And this year, the self-torture the long-distance runners must put themselves through is far worse than ever before. That's because the Olympics are being held in Mexico City, more than 7,000 feet above sea level. And at that altitude, there is significantly less oxygen in the air.
Jerry Linder to Washington State, Van Nelson to St. Cloud.
Yeah. The problem is simply that breathing is less efficient. The thin air troubles many athletes as much and often more than the foreign competition.
Most of it is psychologically, I guess. When I first got up here, I ran about 5 miles and thought I'd run about 25 because I was so darn tired. I just couldn't believe it.
It's an effect that just seems to slow you down. You want to go faster, but you just can't.
Well, it's definitely, pretty bad on you, but once you get used to it and work out for maybe 6 or 7 weeks up here, it's going to be okay. But it's pretty hard getting going.
To try to overcome, or at least prepare the runners for the high altitude, the U.S. Olympic Committee carved out a training camp among the pines in the wilderness just south of Lake Tahoe, high in the Sierras at exactly the same elevation as Mexico City. For the athletes, the setting itself is inspirational. But far more important, training athletes here means that doctors and coaches can study and attempt to do something about the dangers of the altitude.
It's my opinion that that an athlete, a very determined athlete, might run himself into complete oxygen debt. He might be in such deep oxygen debt that even though someone got to him very quickly, that in 30 minutes he might be dead. We don't think there's any chance of this with our people because, one, they're being progressively brought up to this particular stress, and then we have the people who are training them in breathing and warning them of the things that they must do that are going to prepare them to give the utmost effort and still come out of it successfully.
All right, Ron, I'd like for you to, we're going to measure your tidal volume. So why don't you take in a deep breath, hold it, and then blow it as soon as I click this on. All right, taking a deep breath, hold it, blow it.
This is the most elaborate scientific testing program ever undertaken by the U.S. Olympic officials. Specialists like Dr. William Plummer measure how much air each athlete's lungs can hold. With breathing exercises, most men can increase their lung capacity. Many of the tests are outside on the track, running at close to competitive speeds. Jack Daniels, a physiologist and himself twice an Olympic pentathlon competitor, is in charge of this part of the program.
What we're doing, we're looking at their ability to perform at altitude. We have quite a bit of information on what they can do at sea level. During this particular test here on the track, where we have them run at designated speeds, we collect expired air and are able to calculate how much oxygen they're consuming and how much CO2 they're producing. This gives us an idea of how hard they're working and how much work they're capable of doing. In this case, how fast they're capable of running.
Samples of the used air are bottled, tested, and then stored for comparison to see if the athletes are adjusting. Acclimation, adjustment to the high altitude, takes a long time. That is why training and testing started so early. American athletes in meets like this one at Tahoe say they can now feel what it will be like in Mexico. All this scientific huffing and puffing can only give the preliminary results. The real test will be in Mexico City. This time, the Olympics do not just put one athlete against another, but each athlete against his environment. And the outcome could be as important to medical men as to sports fans. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, South Lake Tahoe, California.
Becky Godwin, the 13-year-old adopted daughter of Virginia's Governor Mills Godwin Jr., was seriously injured yesterday when she was struck by lightning at Virginia Beach. Doctors say she has not yet regained consciousness and that her condition is poor, although she is responding to treatment. The governor, who is a favorite son candidate at the Democratic convention, has flown home from Chicago to be with his daughter.
This was going to be the greatest vacation you ever took, until it rained, and rained, and rained. You could move on, if cash were no problem, but it is. Credit cards only delay the problem a month. Wait a minute, the answer is here. This card has built-in freedom. Lets you charge even big items, like an extra couple of days at a hotel or motel. Car rentals, plus practically all your driving expenses. And spread the payments out for as long as a year on American Oil's revolving charge plan.
Come on. We're gonna find some sun.
Yeah, Dad, let's go. Come on.
See your nearby dealer about getting a modern credit card from American Oil. You expect more from American, and you get it.
As we've reported, a compromise agreement has apparently been reached between the Czechs and the Russians meeting in Moscow. But now CBS News United Nations correspondent Richard C. Hottelet reports to us that any agreement worked out in Moscow between the Czechs and the occupying Soviet forces still has to be placed before the National Assembly in Prague for ratification. And the Assembly may insist on two conditions: no change in the government's reform program, none of the press censorship, for example, which is reportedly a part of the settlement reached in Moscow, and the pullout of all Soviet forces. Correspondent Hottelet thinks it's worth pointing out that if the National Assembly should say no to Moscow, it would leave the Soviets with the impossible choice of accepting defeat or precipitating another Hungary. A reminder that CBS News live color coverage of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago begins tonight at 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central Time. This is Charles Kuralt with Walter Cronkite. Good night.
The caveman was the first office worker. When he had an idea, he wrote it on the wall. But he didn't have many ideas, so wasting all that time writing didn't matter. About 1874, man invented the typewriter, and woman began wasting her time, typing, erasing, retyping. By the 20th century, man was spending so much time writing things down, he hardly had time to think things up. So IBM did something. We developed the MTST, a remarkable typewriter on which a secretary can type at rough draft speed, make corrections, and get back error-free final copy automatically. And we brought out our dictation equipment that can take down thoughts 4 times faster than a pencil. These 2 pieces of IBM equipment alone can set your office ahead 20,000 years.
Direct from CBS News Convention Headquarters in Chicago, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Charles Kuralt in the CBS Newsroom in New York. Stay tuned as CBS News begins its coverage of Campaign 68, the Democratic National Convention, live and in color from Chicago, next on CBS. Attention all stations concerned, please stand by for a possible update of tonight's CBS Evening News.